thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session Cloud Security made for the EU, securing data and application. Cloud application will become increasingly important in the future. There's no doubt about that. In this session, we want to talk about securing data and application processed in public cloud infrastructure. What is special about cloud application in terms of IT security and trustworthiness? First, the software and data are processed in the public cloud infrastructure is not controlled or it's not in the customer own control, and in the offered public cloud infrastructure, data can in principle be read or manipulated by the administrator or the attacker with the help of corresponding tools. In addition, the availability of cloud infrastructure and the internet as a communication infrastructure plays an important role. Why is cloud security made for the EU such an important issue? One reason is a different legal basis in the US and in Europe. In European law, the right of information self-sovereignty is set and has a high value. Another reason is a different moral values based on the different cultural background on the respective society. In the end, companies in Europe want more IT security and trustworthiness for these reasons. However, this approach could be relevant to all companies around the world, including those in the US. For this reason, we want to discuss the question of what can we do to increase IT security and trustworthiness. One aspect we would like to discuss is confidential computing. The basic are security functions in the CPU. Code and data are processed in an isolated and encrypted form on the cloud infrastructure. For this reason, code and data cannot be read or manipulated. The authenticity of the data and the code to be run on the cloud infrastructure can be verified remotely by the user or the user company. Then we have continuous security verification, also continuously compliance management and detect changes to cloud resources and their configuration. And last but not least, trustworthiness. Trustworthiness is based on transparency regarding to the cloud solution and the companies. In general, the goal of trustworthiness is to achieve that the user companies have trust in a cloud provider and use the cloud solution for these reasons. So let me bring the panelists into the session. I would like to start with Andreas Wallbrot, co-founder and CEO of the company's Enclave. Andreas has been active in the field of IT security for a long time and from various angles. With Enclave, he is currently very active in confidential computing. Andreas, what is special about confidential computing and why will this technology change everything for the better?
Norbert, thank you. We do bring one slide, and just so you don't have to look at me all the time. So, why do we believe confidential computing is a very important thing for the future, and why is this also relevant in the EU and beyond? Confidential computing basically allows you to resolve a 40-year-old problem to keep data and applications encrypted while they're in use. Sorry, I don't know. Okay, echo's good. Thanks. How do we do this? Quote unquote, we leverage embedded encryption technology and processors from leading manufacturers like AMD and Intel to ensure that the data, when it is pulled into memory, stays encrypted, and you significantly can reduce the attack vectors from the back end. Why do we believe this is important? This is not just a compliancy topic, but it also protects IP and gives you significant sovereignty when you can leverage broad cloud infrastructures across multiple vendors and geographies without having to worry whether this single provider of infrastructure or that single provider of infrastructure gives you the right level of security. So it eases processes on your side, it takes significant costs out of the security operation, and it protects your data, IP, and information while you use it wherever you want to use it, thus allowing you to take the benefits of the cloud without incurring some of the fears and worries. What we have built for the European Union, and of course for any other geography where you would like to use it, is a middleware layer that makes the world simple. Because we all know people sometimes shrug back moving to the cloud because say, where do I find the right people that know everything about the stuff? Is it really compliant? Oh, it's complex. If I have it in my cellar, in my real data center, I have everything under control. So the confidential computing layer takes away part of that, and putting confidential computing into a middleware takes away the need to have specialized people that really understand cryptography at the processor level, which are very scarce, as we all know, and as you've seen in the agenda, it's always a topic that we have. That skill shortage in the security industry is a topic at this conference over the last years that we have jumped. So this for an intro, why we believe this helps us, and it's something that, of course, is driven, as in the title, by some people who think about compliance, but it delivers much more value in every business process that you would like to bring to the cloud, where you encounter challenges around complexity, security, compliance, and resources. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opening statement. The next panelist is Niels Kahn, co-founder and CEO of the company Resility. Niels is specialized in securing public cloud infrastructure, and with Mitigant, they scan as well, have access to multi-cloud infrastructure such as AWS and Azure for compliance standards and verified to improve the cyber resilience. Niels, why does it make sense to review the compliance standard continuously?
Okay, next slide. Well, basically, compliance is one of the first steps when you go on your security journey with the infrastructure at hand. And as you already mentioned, so we basically focus on public cloud infrastructure. So I don't think that you know Pegasus Airline, but the incidents happened there. Basically, someone forgot to put an AWS bucket from public to non-public. It can happen due to the fact that infrastructure grows, and you might lose track of the infrastructure. So what we would like to secure is that with 3 simple steps, secure, detect, and verify, that we are giving you a picture of what is going on in your cloud security-wise, and that we help the stuff you have to actually address security challenges. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Our last panelist is Ulla Köster, Project Director Trustworthiness at the Westphalian University of Applied Science, Gelsenkirchen. Ulla has a lot of experience in the field of IT security, but in the recent years she has been concerned with ethic challenges on the ongoing digitalization. She's currently working with her team on the trustworthiness platform for AI application and data rooms. Ulla, why is trustworthiness of companies offering IT products and services becoming increasingly important?
Yes, thank you for the question, Norbert. It's important for one reason, as digitization is continuing and the complexity increasingly rise. There is it's harder. It's getting even harder for people to understand the technology and the interrelations of the technologies. Not only the individual user, but also the decision makers of the companies. So it's important for all manufacturers and all service providers to help them making their decisions, and this can be done by building a relationship of trust with the companies. So what you see here in the picture is the mutual interaction between regulation and moral of society. As the regulation are mostly anchored in the laws, it's not what I'm taking in consideration today. I'm focusing on the moral of the society and the values of the society. Basically, you can say that if a service provider or manufacturer takes the values of society into consideration and taking them seriously, this is one sign that they are trustworthy. But let's discuss trustworthiness into more depth. Trustworthiness is based on two pillars. It's on competence and corporate integrity. Competence is self-explaining. The companies must strive to provide the best technology and the most secure technology to their user companies. Company integrity, on the other hand, is supporting the business from another angle. This angle is, you can, just a second, I've lost. You can support from another angle. For example, you can reduce the transaction cost when you build relationship of trustworthiness with your customers. Transaction costs can, for example, be the cost of acquiring new customers or initiating business in general, or it can be the time you need to negotiate and sign a contract. All this could take much longer time if you're not have built, if your customer or your user company does not trust you right from the start. Another thing which is really important for the service provider to take into consideration is a contingency. This means that people perceive circumstances differently, which makes their action really more erratic. So these are all reasons for companies to take the focus on building trustworthiness with their clients or with their customers or the user companies because if they don't do that, the customers base their decision for or against the service provider solely on maybe financial aspects. So to avoid this, it's really important to build relationship of trustworthiness, because companies are relating on cooperation, and therefore they need to create win-win situation and do everything pleasant to the interest of their customers. Yeah, and that's why they need to build up a relationship of trustworthiness.
Okay, thanks for your opening statement. So in the next round, I would like to understand some of your aspects a little bit better. Let's start with Andreas again. How complex is it to set up and use confidential computing on any cloud infrastructure?
Well, that depends on which layer you look at. If you try to build that natively on the infrastructure without using any tools, it requires, of course, a deep understanding of cryptography, key management functionality, and your cloud provider needs to offer that to capability that is embedded in its infrastructure to you as a consumer of the cloud. That is why we have gone along and said complexity needs to be taken out so it becomes what we believe future standard in cloud computing, that the future cloud is going to be confidential. Thus, the approach is to abstract that layer for the user, giving him the benefit without the complexity. If you look at another way from another side, what does that mean in terms of compute power? Like, well, now I encrypt and everything takes 10 times as long or 20 times as long, and it does not. That is the good thing about the confidential computing approach, as it has become available over the last 5 years, and the technology has matured significantly, that you can today say, if you do it intelligently, you're in a small single-digit percentage of overhead for confidential computing. When you think about moving your stuff into the cloud or securing your stuff in the cloud, this is a very small number compared to the benefit and the cost savings that you can leverage out of that.
But what would I think every hyperjailer provider offer confidential computing, have the CPU which offer confidential computing, and then you have a layer which is transparent for the user and
of course would be now the commercial part of my presentation, if you like. So the Azures and the Googles of the world provide access to this technical functionality. So you can book a confidential VM, a confidential container in their environment. But if you want it, basically that means you have the raw infrastructure in front of you. If you want to make that easy to use, so either in a Kubernetes or in a VM environment, that's where Enclave as a company has built the middleware to make it so easy that you basically take your application with minuscule changes. You don't have to change your DevOps processes, you don't have to train your developers very much, but you basically enable them to use that technology. And processes and the projects in the past have shown that basically you go through one example, and after that the development team can leverage that technology on their own and can continue to use your classical infrastructure management processes, so the ITSM world, security monitoring, and the DevOps processes don't need to change if you move into confidential computing, leveraging a middleware that makes it simple, as we have done and developed with within Enclave.
Yeah. But if you use encryption and isolation, what was the overhead? If you
the overhead is, that's what I tried to say. The overhead is 3 to 5%.
5%, not more. Okay.
Well, if you do it bad, you can get it worse, of course. But if you do it right, it's
Okay, fine, yeah. So thanks, Niels. You monitoring the cloud infrastructure. What kind of security information for cloud services is important for the user companies?
Yeah, so usually in infrastructure, you build your infrastructure, that means databases, access, and so on. And that's also the resources you want to manage. So one of the things we already discussed a little bit are standards which help you best practices to honor, let's say, the setup of the cloud. And with these resources, I have to say, like with the hyperscalers, sometimes you get a bit lost. Because you build your infrastructure, and sometimes you're not reflecting what you have. So what we provide is more insights into that, what kind of infrastructures may be already not needed anymore. And we also give the insights what kind of settings are maybe not done or done in a wrong way. So these aspects help you to keep that infrastructure in check and govern your infrastructure. Furthermore, usually what you do is like auditing, looking for standards like ISO 27001 or SOC 2. And when you do the audit, it's good, but usually after 2 to 3 weeks after the audit, your infrastructure has moved on, and you need to continuously monitor whatever standard you would like to be in.
So you monitor the state of the art of IT security for cloud services.
Well, basically state of the art when it comes to best practices and governance. And we also have another component, but I will talk about that a little bit later. So to keep you basically in check and to make it very easily, because Andreas already talked about the shortage of stuff which I don't think it will be solved in the next 10 years. It was already 10 years before. So basically what we are doing is to simplify that so that a layer which is called DevOps can actually do the security job, or the security stuff you have can actually cover more ground. That's the both things we actually address with Medea.
So if you find there's something wrong, then the user company can change their configurations or whatever.
Basically will be automatically fixed and
Okay.
And covered for you. So your infrastructure is safe, and Rails basically does all the data, secure all the data.
Yep. Well, you explained to us the idea of your trustworthiness and what criteria play a role for trustworthiness.
Yeah, before we start our research project in the beginning of 2023, also just actually, we built up a trustworthiness model, as you see on the right side. And with this trustworthiness model, we help the service provider or manufacturer to substructure their information to provide their trustworthiness. What the goal of the service provider must be is to create justified trust to the user companies, and to build up justified trust. The user companies must receive signals from the service provider or manufacturer that they really are trustworthy, and this can be done by 7 aspects that we worked out. There are 4 for the companies, namely confidence, reliability, integrity, and IT security. And for the IT solution, it's transparency, performance, and purpose, conciseness. As I have not enough time to explain all of these aspects, I limit myself only to a few. For example, confidence. In confidence management, companies gives the user enterprise or service provider gives the user companies evidence that they are really capable to provide a good IT solution. For example, because they have the necessary resources and the necessary skills to do so. So, for example, they state in the coincidence management that they have a skilled workforce to do their job and to develop a good IT solution. IT security is one of the most important things for trustworthiness, or for building trustworthiness, because the user company must be sure that they have that the service provider do everything to lower their risk, for example, using the cloud. And so in their security guidance, the service provider must describe their security strategy, their long-term security strategy, and giving all the details about their measures they do to secure, for instance, their infrastructure. And there for IT solutions is performance. Performance is that the service provider describe all the performance which is necessary for the user companies to do their business, and this is what the user companies can grasp on and check immediately. And one important thing is the transparency. Within the transparency declaration, the service provider or manufacturer give all details. The user needs to, the user companies needs to make a valid decision if they are really choosing the right IT solution. So, yeah.
Okay, you explained the different aspect of the cloud solution and the cloud companies, but how can they represent their trustworthiness, or what is the way that they can explain that they are trustworthy?
Yeah, that's one part of our research project. What we are currently working on are the, we called it trustworthiness agenda or company commitment. In this company commitment, on the basis of our 7 aspects, service provider or manufacturer can really give all the details the user company needs to trust them. They have every information given in this commitment.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? If yes, please use the microphone. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Tonu Tamer from Estonia. A quick question. I do understand that you talk about cloud. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the specificities on software as a service? How would that apply to that part of the cloud? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Very good point. Software as a service providers are our most beloved clients. I tell you why. We have many software companies that have an issue that customers ask them, well, can we have a private copy? Can we have a local copy? Can we have a dedicated, somehow distracted instance? With the confidential compute concept, you can enable software as a service as if it were in your personal private data center. Thus, you can make software as a service an omnipresent model and can work with a subscription. Yeah. So, what the enclave technology, confidential compute, does basically provides a Trezor, a secure environment where you run your software anywhere. And therefore you can build it as a software as a service model much easier and deploy it in a scalable environment. Does that answer your question, Rafa? Not really? So please.
Specify.
Let's make that more interactive.
It's a little bit difficult to envision how I would put my, for example, company's email service into Google Cloud by saying that, well, your mailbox is no longer in public cloud, but actually in sort of encrypted parts that even Google can't access. How would that work?
Well, for Google Mail, it doesn't work yet, very bluntly. But you could take any of there are other mail software providers and mail tools for that works. So quote unquote, Google of course has a shared service and gives you your, let's say, your private tenant. Yeah? So the private tenant, and depends then on how do you deploy that. If you think of a private tenant as being a container, you could deploy that as a microservice for you within the confidential cloud. So it would be a microservice. Yeah? So it's not the whole system, it's that microservice that is encrypted for you. And what we currently do, for example, for social welfare companies, we leverage Nextcloud technology. Nextcloud is a European software company you might have heard of. So we basically produce a confidential Nextcloud to provide confidential mail, and we use a confidential mail server and some LDAP services, to connect that and make that a confidential instance for social welfare companies, or for this social welfare company, where they have all the functionality of the mail. Of course, on the front end, yeah. So if you go onto your mobile device and you do your email, you're on your mobile device. That is something we do not fix. So as soon as you have a user ID and come through the front door, the many other aspects of security are of course present there. This is not what we address. We address the backend and make it possible to have that microservice. And you can decide, okay, I have 20 clients and I have 20 microservices, and these microservices runs in an enclave and thus is encrypted from the backend. Google Cloud is, Google Mail is not there. You could run it on Google Cloud. Okay.
Other questions at the moment? If not,
Yeah, there's another question.
yeah, okay, please.
Estonians are famously social and talk to everyone, right?
Okay.
My name is Liisa Paast and I'm the National Cyber Director of Estonia. And I think it's quite telling that this conversation is a panel of mostly, as far as I can tell, Europeans in front of an audience of, as I mostly can tell, Europeans in the heart of the US tech industry. And what I think it's an incredibly useful conversation we're having, but I'm having to solve practical problems, which is that, the technology to a degree, unfortunately, but the moral and ethics and the idea of trustworthiness are codified into norms as it is. On the European side, it's GDPR and the NIS directive, particularly NIS2 when it comes to essential service providers. And on the US side, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Patriot Act, you name it, there's half a dozen. So coming from where you are with your deep understanding of these particular issues of encryption and morality, how do we make sure that and the conversation about how we practically can provide cloud to European citizens, that those are convergent and not separate conversations?
Yep. I can also answer if you like.
Okay.
Just start, yeah. No, start, yeah.
Okay. So one thing, thank you very much for that. I try to avoid all the NIST, CPAAs, and so on abbreviations, and to not run, say, European, and that's why GDPR is complex. At the end of the day, what we strongly believe is that no matter where you live on the planet, under which jurisdiction your infrastructure or your personal life falls, you want to be in control of your IP and your data, of your information and your code. And that is why I believe this strengthens the compliance, the acceptance, and the implementation of these directives on either side of the pond. Yeah. So whether it's North Americans or Europeans, and we find that discussion, by the way, in the US just as well. They just have one big advantage. They have one outer boundary and not many inner boundaries as well, at least politically speaking, spoken, or regulatory spoken. So if you speak to an American and say, come on, put my software, I've got a great tool and it runs on OVH or Deutsche Telekom or Orange. And say, no, it needs to run on Azure or Google because we need to have it in the US. And the Europeans sometimes think the other way around. And we take away that. So you can run your software where it's best fit without worrying who is the operator or what is the nationality of the operator, and thus the legal framework under which that company operates underneath your application. And therefore, I strongly believe that NIS2, GDPR, the US regulation, and confidential computing complement each other, because confidential computing makes it easier to comply with any of those. That's our view. Robert, sorry.
Other questions?
Robert, you want to say something to that?
No, it's you already answered. It's what we like to do with the idea of maybe a commitment for the companies is to see that all the monopolists of the US have, of course, follow the GDPR, but they not follow our ideas of privacy, and to see that the companies have to say, okay, we follow the GDPR, but not our moral aspect of privacy. And to read this and to understand that, or to say, okay, we change it and we change our business concept, whatever, that's the idea to make it clear who offer which services and how trustworthy the services is. So let's come to the next question.
So as government organizations work to or respond to consumption of data and usage of data with increasing sovereignty rules to protect their citizens and constituents. How can we avoid hyper-fragmentation of our environments across all of these different sovereignties and the disconnects in our DevSecOps processes or our code deployments while retaining that customer trust or restoring it in some cases?
Who would like to answer?
I always love to answer.
Yeah, you.
So there's, I mean, you find an answer in all three of us here. On the one hand, if you have the trust that your service provider, your software provider, your infrastructure provider is doing something that is understandable and, let's say, traceable for you as a consumer, or even if you're a consumer of business and not consumer in a consumer sense, you generate the visibility across a platform that basically says what you consume is configured to the respective standards, whatever they are and wherever they are. And what we do is basically we give you we support the two. On the one hand, we build the trust that you have I mean, we all know the buzzword zero trust. Yeah, you have the trust that you don't need to trust with the confidential computing, and you have the visibility that you've set it up that your not trust is set up in a way that you cannot trust the not trust in that case. So and there comes the trustworthiness, of course, with the visibility, the traceability, and the description of what you do, and the possibility to explain it to a customer of yours in a very simple, straightforward way. And of course, we all know that that's a challenge that we have in the industry, that we speak a language that is outside these halls of the Moscone Center, sometimes very cryptic as it's on its own. Sorry.
But I think the most important thing of the trustworthiness is, or the concept of trustworthiness is, that the service provider or manufacturer make a commitment, a real commitment. Also, it's not about traceability and all this stuff, but they commit that they do, or they are interested in a cooperation with the user companies and do everything to build up a win-win situation. And I think that's what today may be missing, for example, also in AI or in IT security. And that's what we are aiming at in our research project, that maybe there can be made a change, because we want to do a platform where all service provider or all manufacturers can make their commitments available for the user companies. And we also want to develop a index where the user companies can compare the different companies, and so maybe this can change the way business is made in the future. That's what we try to research and find out in our research project.
Yeah. Just building a bit on your question, you also said DevOps and development itself. How can that somehow be more, let's say, secured or trustfully executed? We built our tool with having in mind that a lot of people don't have the deep domain knowledge in security, so that they actually can use our tool already from the beginning. When they build their solutions and when they build their infrastructure, use it to secure the infrastructure and actually grow with us. And I think, like, if you think of security and also the trustworthiness already in the beginning, wove it into your DNA, then it's much easier to follow on a later point.
Mm. Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I have some additional questions. Maybe we start with Niels. Niels, are there any standards for monitoring the different cloud provider, or is it always different approach to see what they do in the compliance
Yes,
stuff?
already said the bullshit bingo with the standards. So Yeah, there are a lot of standards. ISO 27001, NIST, CIS, and so on. And it's good to honor them as a first step in your security, and let's say also in your journey to a more secure environment. It is important to monitor them. With our tool, we are going one step further. We have the possibility to actually attack the infrastructure of our customers to make it more resilient. Because if you test people, process, and technology, then you are a step further on your security voyage to actually help yourself to be less attackable, to protect yourself better from hackers and attackers.
Yeah. But what do you really provide so that companies have more resilient?
Basically, these standards have a lot of controls where you then access the controls against the infrastructure, and the controls say, for instance, okay, you have a database here, this database is public. Most standards will say you should not have the database public.
Yeah.
As a company, it could be that in a database, or let's say to be just kitty pictures, then it's nothing you really want to protect. Maybe you just want to have a fast exchange with your own customer, all good. But if it is sensitive data, as in the case of Pegasus Airlines, where it was customer data, where it was internal data, then you definitely should not have it public for everyone. So basically these controls will be checked by us.
Okay.
There will be then a solution provided that you can automatically remediate that issue, and that you can then have a secure setting on your side.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Ola, which companies need to represent trustworthiness if you talk about cloud services?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's the cloud provider itself, but I think it's also necessary that the supplier, the technical supplier, proves their trustworthiness as well, as, for instance, that they meet all the requirements of security, the cloud provider, or they're able to meet all the requirements the cloud provider has. So I think it's an additional proof of trustworthiness if a cloud provider can prove that all suppliers are trustworthy as well.
Yeah. So if you mentioned that the cloud provider have to make a commitment so that they are trustworthy. So, but what is if you see it from the point of view of the user companies, what are the real benefits for the user companies?
I think maybe mainly the fee or the costs of the service are an argument for the user. But I think when they once made the decision for a certain cloud provider or service provider, then they don't want to deal any further with this. And so if they trust the service provider, and if they are convinced that the service provider behaves in the best way and in their interest, then they don't have to deal with this any longer. And if another service provider makes them a more attractive offer, they are not inclined to think about it. So yes, trust is really important to make a resilient and solid relationship with your cloud provider.
Yeah. Andreas, we discussed confidential computing more on the theoretical level, how it works, but can you give us some real examples? So how can you use or introduce confidential computing?
Sure. Let's start with a fairly simple example, which I already alluded to earlier a little bit. It's German welfare institutions. What they do is they basically run kindergartens, after school care, and so on. So what they have in terms of data is the children they take care of. And as they're social welfare institutions, they have a lot of troubled family relationships, I would like to say it. They say we have one police action every day, where we send police to the household of a child. This data is something you wouldn't really want to find on the internet. So what they did is they basically put it into a confidential Nextcloud, so all the data stays encrypted anytime. They took away WhatsApp, Microsoft 365, Outlook, Google Mail, and all the tools that they have been using, because the new head of that institution said, you know, guys, when I wake up in the morning, half of me is already in jail if anybody ever goes to court with that, because all this stuff is kind of publicly available. One simple example. Take another example, which is an AI company. They have developed cool AI for sensor analytics. Let's put it that way. Yeah? It's a use case for sensor analytics in manufacturing scenery, and they said our customers are trying to steal our AI logic. So what we deliver appliances to the customer, which collect all the data and do the math and show something fancy on improving their manufacturing processes. But we have noticed that the hackers in the companies try to steal our IP. So what they came to us and said, can you put our application into an enclave and still have it run performant? And guess what? So we basically built a confidential appliance, which is not really in the cloud. We said you could put it in the cloud, but they didn't want to. So we still want to deliver an appliance, but when I would say a confidential appliance that uses all the technology in the cloud, where the customer says, maybe we go in the cloud going forward, but today we'll still keep it there. So it also eases the way. Just to give you two examples, and if we had another 2 hours, I would have another.
Okay. Maybe last question. Can you close every other security operations when you use confidential computing?
Yeah, that would be lovely. Unfortunately, we cannot. Yeah, we reduce the attack surface, but you still need to do your identity access governance. You still need to know your monitoring. You of course need to have your systems configured correctly, because you don't want anybody to get to your identities. You of course want to continue to have physical security, and you need to do endpoint security because the endpoint is still something that is currently not confidential, because that's where it becomes visible on the screen. So that is where you definitely need to have your security controls in place, but you can be more efficient. You can reduce cost for audit and compliance measures and spend that in the right places to really bring up your organization to the quality level and maturity that you want to be.
Okay. So let's come to today's takeaways. Trust will continue to speed up the pace of cloud adoption. The ease of use of the applied IT security will accelerate trust. Confidential computing is now a capable IT security concept, an ideal way to protect cloud application. Continuous monitoring of security controls and their verification creates hardened and resilient cloud infrastructure, and presenting the trustworthiness of cloud solution as well of the cloud provider creates an additional but an increasingly important trust for the companies. So unfortunately our session is over. I would like to thank the panelists and the audience for the interesting session. Please visit the German Pavilion at North Expo Hall, booth 69. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.